This is Handelsblatt Global Edition in Berlin, and this was 2015. Germany was at the centre of world events this year, and so was its Chancellor, Angela Merkel. When refugees began arriving by the thousands from Syria and elsewhere, no one knew what to do with them. Except Miss Merkel, who said, "Let them in, we can cope." Germany took in more than 1 million refugees this year, the equivalent of 4 million entering the United States. There is little doubt the newcomers will change German society.
Und es wird eine zentrale Herausforderung sein, nicht nur für Tage oder Monate, sondern, soweit man das absehen kann, für eine längere Zeit. Und deshalb ist es wichtig, dass wir schon sagen, deutsche Gründlichkeit ist super, aber es wird jetzt deutsche Flexibilität gebraucht.
The big question is whether Angela Merkel will be around as Germany's Chancellor to see it through. Under fire from Conservatives at home and facing hostility and scepticism in Europe, Ms Merkel has her work cut out for her. Not all Germans have been as welcoming as Ms Merkel. As 2015 began, an anti-Islam group sprung up in Dresden called Pegida. What began on a xenophobic Facebook page grew into a movement. In January, some 25,000 people turned out at a weekly rally, some carrying mock gallows for Ms Merkel and government leaders. The group seemed to falter amid infighting and public condemnation, but elsewhere in Europe, terror attacks fueled a rise in right-wing populism. The streets of Europe seemed more dangerous. In Paris, gunmen murdered 8 people at the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Ms Merkel came to support French President François Hollande in the French capital, and armed police stood guard outside Berlin newspaper offices. At the end of 2015, Germany's friendship with France was tested again. On Friday, November the 13th, Islamist terrorists attacked a concert hall, sports stadium and cafes across Paris, slaughtering 130.
C'est un acte de guerre qui a été préparé, organisé, planifié de l'extérieur et avec des complicités intérieures que l'enquête permettra d'établir.
France called for help in destroying the perpetrators sent by the Islamic State. Usually reluctant to get involved militarily, Germany agreed to send some fighter jets and a frigate to help the war effort in Syria. Corporate Germany was changing too. Companies that used to be a byword for reliability suddenly seemed shaky. Volkswagen, the biggest company on the benchmark DAX, faced its own existential challenge. The number 2 automaker shocked the world in September when it admitted rigging emissions tests on 11 million diesel cars. The biggest scandal in Volkswagen's 78-year history has already cost more than 7 billion euros in damages and untold reputational loss. Cars made by Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Seat and Skoda cars were all affected.
Es tut mir unendlich leid, dass wir dieses Vertrauen enttäuscht haben. Ich entschuldige mich in aller Form bei unseren Kunden, bei den Behörden und der gesamten Öffentlichkeit für das Fehlverhalten.
Dieselgate, as the scandal became known, wiped $30 billion off Volkswagen's market value and led to the departure of its chief executive, Martin Winterkorn. The car maker, which employs 600,000 people and sold 10 million cars last year, faces 500 lawsuits in the United States alone. In Europe, Volkswagen may be able to avoid similar costs with a simple software upgrade. Germany's largest bank also hit a wall, leading to the departure of 2 CEOs who had tried to revive the Frankfurt financial institution from the ashes of the 2008 global financial crisis. In April, Deutsche Bank was slapped with a record $2.5 billion fine for conspiring to rig global interest rates. The case is one of thousands the bank faces, but it was the last straw for the battered shareholders. In May, they started a revolt that led to the ouster of its co-leaders, both long-time veterans of the bank. A soft-spoken, bottom-line British banker John Cryan took over in July. Mr. Cryan spent the summer going through the business line by line, looking for ways to cut costs and bring a turnaround in the bank's culture. In October, he said Deutsche Bank would reduce the workforce by 35,000 jobs, including 9,000 full-time job cuts.
It's kind of useless to suggest that our cost reductions are ambitious, but we think that they're realistic in the context of where the bank is and our need to remain competitive.
The market reaction was cautiously optimistic, but Mr. Cryan will need to show investors that his grand plan can boost the bank's bottom line and prospects. 2015 was also the year Germany's 2 biggest utilities, E.ON and RWE, reinvented themselves. They had struggled to cope with the government-led transition to alternative energy. By 2022, Germany plans to shut all of its nuclear power plants, and by 2050, draw at least 80% of energy from renewables. In response, E.ON said it would split its business, with one focusing on nuclear and fossil fuels and the other on renewables. Months later, RWE did the same. Many jobs will be lost in the process. Germany's bold energy transformation may benefit the environment in the long run, but shareholders and employees will suffer along the way. The national airline Lufthansa had another rough year. Ongoing strikes with cabin and ground crews cancelled thousands of flights, many timed to cause maximum irritation. Despite the endless talks, no breakthrough had been reached with unions by the year's end. But labour strife was the least of Lufthansa's problems. In March, a pilot at its discount carrier Germanwings deliberately flew an Airbus A320 into the side of a mountain in the French Alps, killing all 144 passengers.
Wir haben das erste Mal in der Geschichte, in der 60-jährigen Geschichte unseres Unternehmens ein Flugzeug im Reiseflug verloren. Und das muss, glaube ich, erstmal verarbeitet werden. Da geht es aber weniger um mich, sondern vielmehr um die Helfer vor Ort.
The pilot had been treated for depression, but Germany's strict privacy laws and Lufthansa's own internal controls let him make his deadly, self-indulgent plunge into the abyss. And if corporate Germany was having an existential crisis, so was the Eurozone. Greece unsettled the euro currency bloc after voters, fed up with EU-imposed austerity, elected the far-left Syriza party to power. The Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, threatened other euro countries with disaster, promising to defy further austerity mandates unless creditors granted it another bailout on its terms.
Today, in Europe, Greece and the Greek people are synonymous with resistance and dignity. This struggle will be continued together for a full 4 years, because the mandate we got is a 4-year mandate.
The bluff played out over months, but ultimately failed. Largely because Germany, Europe's paymaster general, held firm. In the end, Greece was given another bailout, but was forced to promise yet again to implement more austerity. Many believe the euro crisis is far from over, and some are predicting the emergency will flare up again in 2016. Germany has normally been reluctant to intervene militarily abroad, but this year it had no choice. Russia annexed the Crimea, and separatist fighters waged war against Kiev in eastern Ukraine. Ms. Merkel, a fluent Russian speaker, became the key broker between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the West. At all-night talks with Putin in Minsk, she refused to drop European sanctions against Russia, but left the door open for the Russian leader to retreat gracefully.
Dieser politische Beschluss aller Staats- und Regierungschefs heißt, dass wir die Dauer der Sanktionen an die Erfüllung des Minsker Paketes vom Februar diesen Jahres binden wollen. Es ist vollkommen klar, dass die Erfüllung dieses Paketes länger dauert als der August, September. Das heißt, wir werden uns im Juni dieser Frage widmen und ich denke, auf der Basis des gemeinsamen politischen Beschlusses vom März dann auch eine solche Verlängerung der Sanktionen in dem von mir genannten Kontext beschließen.
So far, nothing's changed. A tenuous ceasefire continues to hold in the eastern Ukraine, but the situation is tense. Angela Merkel has been a giant in world politics this year. Little wonder that at the end of year dominated by mostly negative corporate news in Germany and across Europe, Time magazine chose her as its 2015 Person of the Year. Wishing you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from all of us here at Handelsblatt Global Edition. May 2016 bring good things for all of us.